All right. Well, I'm really excited to have Jessica Baum on the podcast today. I know that a lot of us, you've been listening to this intimacy series and you've been listening to all the different kinds of intimacy, and maybe you've already discovered the place that maybe your relationship, your marriage is struggling. And today I'm so excited because we're going to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart, which is emotional intimacy. I don't necessarily think that any of the intimacies are better or more important. I already talked about spiritual intimacy a few weeks ago, so you guys know where I stand on that. But emotional intimacy is so important to develop authentic connection. So let me tell you a little bit about Jessica, and we're going to jump into our conversation. So Jessica is an accomplished speaker. She's been featured on many top-rated podcasts, as well as the hit series Betrayal on Hulu. Her insights have been featured in lots of magazines like British Vogue, InStyle, Parents, and Elle. Her first book, Anxiously Attached, has already sold over 120,000 copies, and it also has over 1,100 positive reviews on Amazon. That's great. Her upcoming book is called Safe, an attachment-informed guide to building more secure relationships, and it builds on the foundation of her first book and offers readers not only awareness, but also transformation. With training in interpersonal neurobiology, which we're definitely going to ask her about, trauma informed care, and decades of clinical experience, Jessica translates the science of connection into language that people like you and me can actually use, and equips listeners with practical tools to help them to identify and heal their attachment wounds. Jessica, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. All right. I just want to, before we dive in, I mean, you got a lot of accolades to your name. What is neurobiology? Like, what do you study? What is, if someone had to say, like, what is it that you study? How would you put that in layman's terms?
So, interpersonal neurobiology is like the study of us from like womb through development on how connection and our environment kind of impacts our development and shapes our nervous system and how we relate in the world. So, it's just the study of how we develop and how, how these, beginning things can lay some foundations for us. So attachment theory is very strong in interpersonal neurobiology and how important the connection is between primary caregiver and infant, and how that those connections literally lay down the blueprint for the rest of our lives.
That's so important. There's a lot of talk right now in lots of spaces about attachment theory. And so, most of us know that we attach a certain kind of way in relationships. I often say that you can't get away from what you marinated in for 18 years, your family of origin. And so we know that there's some truth or some evidence about how we attach in relationships. Most people again would agree with that, but how would you define, if someone's coming to this conversation maybe brand new, maybe they've never heard of attachment theory before, how would you define attachment theory to that person?
Well, attachment theory is a very well studied science from like the 1950s. There's a lot of research, and there are 4 types of attachment. And we can embed more than one attachment style, but they're secure, anxious. Obviously, I wrote the book for Anxiously Attached, disorganized or fearful, and avoidant. And
Hmm.
so I can go into each one of these if you want me to, but basically, it's how our primary caregivers have interacted with us that start to form how we adapt to connection, and our nervous system adapts, and how that shows up later in our romantic relationships. So
Hmm.
if you're more anxious, you had a parent that was anxious too, sometimes there, sometimes not. The hallmark is inconsistency.
Mm.
So these people, we self abandon, and we can feel the needs of others. And, people pleasing, codependency typically falls into this category of anxious attachment. But it's really about like, my mom was sometimes there, and sometimes she was so stressed out, I could sense that she was not there. So there's this inconsistent feeling that makes me scared of abandonment all the time. There's a
Mm.
conscious level of abandonment, where on the other extreme is avoidant, where they didn't really get their emotional needs met. Maybe they got their physical needs met, but the parents weren't really present. That's not their fault. That's happening a lot in our culture, but they learn my needs don't matter, so why even try? And they end up becoming super hyper independent. And ironically, anxious and avoidant tend to attract, and that's another whole topic. And I would say disorganized, fearful is because when we're infants, we need our parents so badly. If they're abusive or totally detached or neglectful, we are stuck in the state of I need them, I need to reach out to them, but I'm also terrified. So it's a sense of like I want to be in relationship, but I'm scared of relationship. And then secure, it's not that they don't struggle with any of these things, but they bounce back faster. They don't have a problem with intimacy. They don't have a problem, an overt problem with abandonment. They have relationship struggles, but they seem to attract people who can meet their needs because the felt sense in their body was my parent met my needs enough of the time and I felt seen enough of the time. And ironically, they go out in the world and they expect that and they usually attract that. So they have like an easier path if we have a more secure base. But I clearly did not have a secure upbringing, and I wrote the book Anxiously Attached and Safe. And you very much can earn inner security. There is a lot of work to it, but I spell that out in Safe, how to really internalize in a way where you can become more secure internally.
Yeah, I love that you said that you can earn the secure attachment, because I think a lot of people might think, "Oh shoot, like my parents were neglectful or my parents were inconsistent. So this is why I'm the way that I am and I'm just always going to be this way." But to know that you can actually learn how to develop a safer, more secure attachment in your relationship. So I want to piggyback off of something that you mentioned, and I think it's a really great point. You said that people can have multiple attachment styles. So if people can have multiple attachment styles or multiple attachment patterns, what would that look like in someone? Like, does that change from relationship to relationship? Or are you saying that maybe at one stage of your life, you have a certain attachment style and then it changes? And why would that be important for someone to know?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a layered question. And in Safe, I talk about the wheel of attachment. So when we're growing up, we can have an experience with a parent that's disorganized and secure. And we can have many experiences within one system. And I write about in one family unit, we might have experiences with an anxious mom and an avoidant dad, right? So we internalize all those patterns. And when you start to talk about attachment theory, my embedded pattern and my default is connected to your embedded pattern. So, Dana, if
Mhm.
you're really anxious and I'm really avoidant, it's going to show up a certain way if that's your default or that your go to. I guess the best way to explain it is I could have a very avoidant boyfriend and feel anxious, and I could have a very anxious girlfriend and feel more anxious, so it shows up differently in different ways. A lot of people will say, oh, I'm this, or oh, I'm that, but then I show up this way sometimes.
Mhm.
So it's layered. I mean, that's why I wrote Safe, is to really paint the more holistic view of how attachment swings on a circle. I literally call it the wheel of attachment. And in one relationship, you can flip flop. You can
Mhm.
you can switch from anxious to avoidant in that way, where you're never really getting to true intimacy. You're either running or chasing. You're going through this dance together, which can feel intense and exciting and horrible and like a whirlwind, but you're not really getting into long periods of sustained connection and real intimacy.
Yeah, and that's why we're having this conversation, because I think these things are important for us to know for the end goal, which is connection, which is real, authentic intimacy. So people are in relationships just feeling like I'm crazy, or I don't do relationships right, or I'm not cut out for relationships. And those things aren't true. It's just that they haven't learned some of the things that are kind of working, I think, in the background, that affect us all. So first of all, I want to talk about your book Safe. And is Safe an acronym? Because I think the way that it's kind of
No.
the way that it looks to me, it's an acronym. So the Safe stand for something?
No, safe is literally the foundation of what we all need. In early infancy, we need a neuroception of safety, and in our relationships, we need safety. And in order to have true intimacy, we need a neuroception of safety. So if you read the book, you start to understand like how we internalize safety, or how we internalize a lack of safety, and how that shows up playing out in our romantic or serious or familiar bonds. I talk about work relationships too. This isn't just about romance, although romantic relationships seem to be the ones where our implicit and unconscious wounds and patterns tend to repeat themselves the most,
Why do you think that is?
because they're the closest. So it's
Yeah.
all closest bonds. But
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure people are listening and they're like, my boss reminds me of my father. Like
Hmm.
that always happens too. So, different dynamics repeat in different types of power struggles, and close relationships.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how, like, a lot of couples that I coach, most of the couples that I coach are married, and so a lot of them want and they long for like real intimacy. They long for deep connection, but and I'm not trying to generalize, but it seems that sometimes the husbands, more so than the wives, are the ones who are like inadvertently pushing away connection. Like they say, "No, I want this," but they're pushing it away. And I noticed that even in my own life with friendships. There would be friends, especially coming up like in high school, where I would be like, "Oh, I want this girl squad. I want these." But then it was like as people got too close, I would do something, usually subconsciously, to push them away. So first of all, how can people recognize that they're doing that? And why do people do that? And what can they do to avoid pushing people away and really sabotaging the connection that they say that they want?
No, I'm laughing because I see it happening in the dating world all the time. Like people are like, I want this kind, wonderful person. And then that person engages and they're like, no, I'm running away. And
Yeah, like too
it's
much.
like this awareness of I desire intimacy, but intimacy also really scares me,
Mm,
and so, and I can say, as someone who wrote Anxiously Attached and has been in many relationships, it wasn't until I did some deeper work, because remember, intimacy is into me, I see.
yes, yes.
So it wasn't until I did some deeper work in my own life that I could connect in my anxious attachment. I could stay close, I could people please, but I couldn't hold the space as much for their disconnection or their issues, right? So
Mhm.
when I did more work and held more space and had more intimacy and holding more parts work inside myself, I could be more intimate with others. So a lot of people complain, and I was one of them. Like, I get it, but I think the work sometimes starts with you, and you don't even realize that that's where it starts.
Yeah, yeah, and again, just looking at me, like I had to ask myself, like, why do I push people away? What am I afraid of? And I think those are the hard questions. Like, what am I afraid of? A lot of us are afraid, like, oh, if people really knew me, like the real me that nobody else knows, then they're going to reject me. So that fear of rejection. And then that is often triggered by how we grew up, if you felt rejected in your childhood or what have you. So I think for me, the work that I did was realizing that like everybody has issues, right? Like sometimes we idolize people, we look at these people and we're like, oh my gosh, like this person would be such a great friend because they've got this, or this business partner potential would be like such a great partner because, and like everybody has issues, everybody has fears, everybody has roots of things in their lives that they're hopefully working through. So I think just getting really honest with yourself and asking yourself those questions is a good place to start. What would you say to that?
Absolutely, absolutely. Just being really honest and know that it's really normal to crave something. I mean, that's sometimes like the avoidant, or sometimes this disorganized trap is like a longing and a deep desire for closeness. But then when it appears, I run away and I can't seem to, cross that barrier, or, it's that longing, but also that fear in combination. And that's really common.
Mm-hmm.
I would tell listeners. And what are you really afraid of? Like for what you're saying, it could be developmental shame. Like if I wasn't unconditionally received as a child, I like inherently, so when we're little, we don't have the ego, we're egocentric, but we don't have the sense of something's wrong with mom or dad.
Mm-hmm.
We can't sense that something's wrong in that way. If they're off, if they're fighting, it scares our little being. We're in our right hemisphere. So we think, oh my God, something's wrong with me,
Right.
right? Because
Right.
actually, if you think about it, if something's wrong with your mom and your dad, you're in big trouble if you're a 2-year old.
Mm-hmm.
But also you can't think that way. So you turn a lot inward. You're constantly turning inward. And I would say with more insecure attachment, there's a deep seed of shame around something is inherently wrong with me. And actually, that was a brilliant adaptive strategy that we did in order to survive in our environment. And we have to meet those parts with unconditional positive regard and acceptance. Most people are like, ick, I don't want to go near that. So, sometimes we need safe people to hold space to meet the parts that weren't accepted. And that's one part of the transformational healing, is to do that work with another nervous system.
Yeah, I think that is lifelong work. I approach these things from a faith-based perspective, and I think that for me, like experiencing the unconditional love of God, like that he knows me in and out. He created me. He knows my flaws, my weaknesses, my strengths, my fears, my anxieties, all of those things. And I'm still completely loved and accepted. Like that's not just something that you just understand on a, neurological level, like on a cognitive level, I should say, but it took some work, it took some time. I also did not grow up with my biological father. I grew up with a stepfather who was very task oriented, very performance.
Frustrated.
And yeah. And so
There's
like
your avoidant. That's
yeah,
your avoidant. That's in the avoidant category.
100%. And so like learning to undo that and learning that I am not, I mean, for the longest time I thought I was an Enneagram 1. You know what I mean? Like everything was about performance and
Hmm.
it's got to be perfect, And so I was able to just years of work, and still honestly doing some of that work, point out like, oh wow, that's why I attach that way or don't attach that way
Hmm.
because of those things. So no, this is so good. This is
Yeah.
important for people to know.
Like I talk a lot about this in the book about left hemisphere and avoidance kind of coming through intergenerationally.
Mhm.
And so when we live in the left hemisphere, which I did with workaholism, which is different, but kind of the same, when we have an avoidant parent, one of the ways we can stay in connection with them is by doing things.
Yeah.
And they're really trying to help us. I mean, they're basically passing on what they know to succeed. The problem is if we are more avoidant or in the left hemisphere, we're doing things and we can connect, but we're not connecting on that deeper emotional level. And
Yeah.
I would say the other extreme for anxious parents, the child learns that if I take care of my parent, I can stay in connection. So those individuals become caretakers to stay in connection, which is also lacking like intimacy. So we tend to adapt according to what our parents need or tell us, and they're usually giving us the best advice that they have based on
Right.
what they receive. But often the number one thing to build secure attachment is emotional presence, and
Mm,
so often than not that is really what is missing. An unconditional positive secure presence is missing in a lot of childhoods. We're
yeah.
so busy on like trying to be successful little machines.
Yes, yes, and I love that you said emotional presence. My husband and I were just having a conversation about this, with our oldest son, and my oldest son, he's 26, and we were having this conversation, and I was a stay-at-home mom for many years on purpose because I wanted to be there for my kids, but I was a young mom, so I still had all this like emotional stuff that I hadn't worked through yet. And my son was like, "Mom, you were present physically, but not really emotionally." And I was like, you know what I mean? But it was true. Like when I look back at, I was a body in the house that was giving kids chores and tasks to do because that's how I came up, right? And then I realized, oh wow, like yeah, I got to make a switch. And so, I apologize to my oldest son all the time because I'm like, listen, kid, you were the experimentation child. We didn't know what we were doing when we had you, so we've like kind of had some other iterations of this. We've got 4 kids, and I hope that with each child we've gotten better. But I think there is a difference between just presence, like I'm here, and emotional presence, like I'm here with you. I'm here with you and I see you. And I think that that is what in relationships, regardless of what kind of relationship, that's what we're all craving and that's what we need. So I recently did a podcast episode, Jessica. It was the difference between chemistry and intimacy. And you talk about intensity versus intimacy, which I love. So tell us a little bit, what is the difference between intensity and intimacy, and how can we tell those two apart?
Oh my God. And who hasn't fallen for intensity equals intimacy?
Yes.
I would say like intensity is one of those charged things. You meet someone and your trauma usually overlaps and it feels like a whirlwind romance, and it's intense and there's lots of neurochemicals being released. And maybe you're bonding, but you're not getting really vulnerable usually. You're just kind of
Mm,
wrapped up in this like place. I think that, I write about this in the book, like the number one thing where most people like with trauma bonds is this mistake for intensity versus intimacy. Like intimacy is slower. it's
mm,
it's it's full of vulnerability, it's
yeah.
full of uncomfortableness, it's full of realness, it's not built on fantasy. It's just like more present and
Mm,
less fantasy based, I would say. Maybe the listeners can relate to that.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm. Yeah, I'm thinking about, like, in an early relationship where there's infatuation and, you're like, "This person gets me," and, and I find this a lot. I deal a lot with couples who have experienced infidelity, so that new relationship, right, is like, "Oh, this person just understands me, and they see me, and they get me," and that's they think it's intimacy. They'll say, "I love this person loves me." It's not love, it's certainly not intimacy, but it's that intensity that you're talking about. It's
yeah,
this
I mean,
yeah, like this powerful, this feeling that people are chasing, and it dies out. And then people want to know why then, I'm jumping from relationship to relationship, chasing that intense feeling that is supposed to die out.
absolutely. I mean, and we could go into sex addiction and all of that kind of escaping, but sometimes what happens if the attachment wounds are really early, we project the unmet needs onto someone else. So someone comes in and love bombs us, or there's an intensity. It's like, my unmet needs are going to get met in this person. And let me idealize them and let me project that they're going to save me, and that all of this stuff can happen. And it can feel so intoxicating, so alluring. I talk about implicit memory in
Mm,
SAFE, a lot about implicit memory, and it's the memory that lives in our system, that a lot of people say are unconscious, but we're very conscious of it. And it's usually attached to wounds, or it's not attached to wounds. That's not right, but it's sensational based, and
mm,
it usually goes towards what's familiar. So sometimes we can pick someone and it just feels right, but it's not so much that it's right, it's that it's familiar. And
mm,
I've certainly done that. And I like to put a positive spin on it. Like, if you're moving towards what's familiar, your consciousness is saying, let's wake up. Let's see, what is it about this person that's waking up on you? What is it about your childhood that's familiar here? I've been in a situation where later you're 3 or 4 years in the relationship and you're also then re-experiencing your childhood all over again in the relationship.
yeah.
And I think most really great relationship experts would say that happens. And we pick people where we recreate some dynamic. And
Mhm.
our work is, and this is what I help people do, and it's also in the book, is to get conscious of what we're repeating in our adult relationships so we can heal, so that we
So
don't just keep repeating the same trauma bond or the same cycle. And that takes the right support, the right knowledge, the right people. It's a journey.
yeah, yeah, I was gonna say, that's I love the fact that you talk so much about healing in safe, because I think that it's one thing for us to have understanding about something. It's one thing for us to understand, like, there are people who are like, I know all the attachment theories. That's great, but like, how is that helping you to heal from your issues? And so you
Yeah.
talk a lot about healing in the book. And I want to know, and you kind of started talking about this a second ago, but like, what does that healing process actually look like? Let's say someone is made aware listening to this episode right now. They're like, oh my gosh, I have an anxious attachment. Like, what does the healing process look like for that person?
I raised my hand because I wrote the book on anxiously
Mm,
attached and I still had to walk through the fire. You
mm,
know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I was obsessed with attachment theory, and like I thought if I could learn everything about it, I could figure it out. And
Mm,
the problem with healing attachment wounds, it's not held you're not going to heal it logically. So
yeah.
you have to heal it in the body. So most attachment wounds are stored in our soma and in our body, and we have to do more kind of somatic work to
Mm,
be with our earlier memories that live in our body. And we need a lot of safe relationships. So I talk about it in safe, and people listening might hear this as hard, but like, some of the earlier wounding you can't heal without another relationship. So what was wounded in relationship has to get healed in relationship. And a lot of that is going towards the sensations that live in your body that get wakened up. I don't say triggered, but
mhm,
wakened up in relational experiences, and going to the original wound and understanding what you didn't receive or what you didn't get, re-experiencing it with a new nervous system that is tracking you, that is co-regulating you, that is helping you make sense of it. So we move the attachment trauma from the body up into the right hemisphere, and then it gets integrated into the left. And I explain the science. Like, this is not woo-woo. This is
mhm.
literally the neuroscience of how neural nets open. We hold these parts together, and integration actually happens.
Yeah, this is so rich. There was a podcast episode I did recently with a guy named Frank Meadows. He is a Christian marriage and relationship therapist. I think he's just a general therapist, a clinician, but he talks a lot about stored memories, a lot. And in our conversation and in other conversations I've had, I find that that is probably the scariest place for people, especially I think the deeper the trauma is, because a lot of us, we've gone through things in our lives and it's like, I'm just going to, thank God that's over. I'm going to forget about that. And then to tell someone like, you need to go back into those stored memories to heal them, I think can be really scary. So, do you recommend that people do this with someone else? Or can someone listening to the podcast be taking notes and be like, all right, I'm going to sit down on my couch and I'm going to do this work on my own?
Well, two things. One, I would say if you're listening and you're like, I don't want to go back, I'm going to tell you right now, your implicit memories and your trauma is still running your life.
Mm,
So, like, if you really slow down,
so good.
it's there. It's
Yeah,
there all the
so good.
time. I said to my mentor, I had to go through this. She's like, you were miserable before.
Mm,
You had to slow down and go through this. It was there. You might have been surviving it a little better. You might not have been in the fire as much, but it was always there, kind of in the undercurrents. And yeah, I mean, it's so hard to be a self-help writer and a successful one and have to tell people that over and over, the neurobiology shows that healing happens in relationship,
mm,
and that I spell out, it doesn't have to be a therapist or a coach. I use the word anchors in the book. I
mhm,
talk about what that person's nervous system has to be like and how they have to respond to you and how you can co-anchor each other. But that earlier the wounds, the more adult anchoring we need.
mm.
So if we got wounded really early, we cannot heal it on our own. And if you're listening, I know that might not sound great, but here's the thing. I don't want you spending years of your life reading self-help books
Yeah.
and not understanding why you aren't getting any traction. So I really talk about the type of people that we need, how to ask for that from people. And I also want people to know, like, not every therapist can hold, right? So
Mhm,
it's about
mhm.
really identifying who has the capacity to be in my life, maybe co-anchoring, maybe doing the journey together, and understanding what that means from an interpersonal neurobiology lens. Why does that person's nervous system, why does that matter to you? Why does them not trying to fix you or tell you what to do matter? Because we really need people who will not do that. We need
Yes.
people who will hold space.
And that's hard for a lot of people to just hold space. And again, going back to the word present, we had a couple of people in our life this week who have lost people. Like, one of my son's football team members lost his dad, and then the coach lost his dad like the next day. And so, my son's like, I'm gonna reach out, and I was like, okay, you should reach out. I'm gonna reach out too. And I said, and you know what people really need in this time is just presence. They don't need a lot of advice. I mean, what do you say to somebody? Like, there's nothing that you can say that's going to make them feel better. You can encourage them, but that's just what people need is presence. And I think that it shouldn't take a funeral or a death in order for us to figure that out, but just in our lives. And so for me, in all of my relationships, I've really started to reorganize my day so that I can make space for the people that are important to me. And even like with my clients, as a coach, of course I want to help and I want to be like, steer them in the right direction, but I think it takes a lot of self-control. It takes a lot of compassion to sit with someone in their struggle and not feel like you have to fix them. And so I
Mhm.
love that you're saying like really finding those people, regardless if it's a therapist or coach, it has to be a safe person who's going to like hold space for them, who's going to just let them emote and let them talk. And yeah, just kind of you can help by not helping. You can help by not feeling like you're giving someone advice or leading them in a direction that you feel like they should go. So for people who might be like, okay, I'm a little nervous about sitting with someone. Like, I'm a little nervous about really even again going into some of these emotions. Like, what would step one be for them, Jessica? Like, if there's maybe one practice from the book Safe that listeners can do, like right after this episode. Like, what's the first thing that they can do right now if they're feeling stuck, if they're feeling lonely, if they feel like they have no emotional connection in their relationships? What's the first thing that you would recommend that they do?
Aside by the book, I would say
Of course, we're gonna get them to buy the book too. Yeah.
But I would say that resourcing any safe experience. So we internalize a lot of things in our life, everything. But if we had a safe experience with a grandmother or a dog or an aunt or a place, we can close our eyes and start to think about the connection that we had with that person. And
Mm,
actually, what we're doing is we're reminding our nervous system of something that was safe in the past. And if we spend a lot of time really resourcing that, we can remind our body what that felt like and actually magnetize more of that in our life. I mean, I have a lot of exercises, somatic practices in the book. In fact, when you buy the book, it comes with these separately recorded somatic meditations. But that's like the one thing I could say is like one of the first ones is like, let's find our inner anchors, which could be people from childhood. And then we find our outer anchors, which are people in our life now. But the inner anchors, we don't realize that we really can access through mirror neurons and what we know about science. We can access people, places, or things that have touched us before, and we can recultivate the same feelings just by closing our eyes and thinking about them.
that's so good. That's so good. I love that. I love that thought of like going back to those again, those memories, but the good ones.
Mm-hmm.
What would you tell a couple who is struggling with emotional intimacy and maybe they're thinking, yeah, my spouse is a hot mess or I'm a hot mess and we've got a lot of work ahead, but we don't want to wait until we're completely healed to start to develop emotional connection? What would be your advice to them? Something that they can start to do now to build that in their relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't, I think you heal it in the relationship. And I think, one of the things like if you're listening and I talk this through a little bit deeper is what are the themes and what are the feelings that are being repeated in my marriage or my partnership right now? Write them down and then feel into them. What about these feel familiar?
Mm,
And once we started to feel into the familiar, oh, this is the way I felt around in one relationship I had with a person who struggled with substance abuse. I was really being activated at the time, and my therapist, who was brilliant, was like, "And how does this feel in your body?" And I was really regressing, and my dad struggled from substance abuse. So what was so amazing is stop becoming about him.
mm,
And it started to become around my original wound was this little girl who was terrified when her dad got high. And all of a sudden, I stopped trying to change him, fix him, or whatever. And I was starting to be with parts of myself that had nothing to do with him. He was just waking them up in me. And
wow.
this is like an aha moment that you can have through some work that gives more compassion and more space to like what the circular issues keep happening. The issues that keep happening usually have implicit information. They usually have a deeper root to them. And sometimes we need help from a professional to kind of start to see like what am I actually repeating? What is the trauma that's showing up? But when I could shift to wow, this is my infant, my little girl trauma around a dad who was high, and that's why I'm just so dysregulated. My therapist could hold it with me, and then like all of a sudden my partner, he's important, but he's an adult struggling with his own stuff, and
Right.
my need to control him went away, and my need to take care of what was going on inside of me had deeper roots and became so much more profound than what was happening in the here and now.
That is so powerful. I often talk about in relationships, it's like that iron that sharpens iron. And a lot of times we think of like, that's like, yeah, I'm gonna be successful and this other person's gonna be successful. And sure, but when you have two iron plates rubbing against each other, that creates friction. And so there's friction or conflict in the relationship that can serve you well if you pay attention to it. And so I think in your case, you saw this is a person who's exhibiting some behavior that is really troubling me, disorienting me. And thankfully, your therapist was able to help you to see, okay, this really isn't about, yeah, it's important. Like, you don't want to be in love with someone who's addicted to substances, right? But it's really
100%.
not about that. It's really about what's going on in here. So his addiction almost was like a gift to you. I don't know if you've ever said it that way.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I'm hearing it.
I
Yeah.
would say I would say that his behaviors, listen, if you're listening, we want our partner to behave a certain way. We certainly
Yes.
have our standards and you're allowed that. And his behaviors, and I still hold love for this person in my heart. His behaviors deeply impacted me. But the
Mm,
reason they deeply impacted me to the level that they did was because they were behaviors that I had experienced before. So 80% of what I was so upset about was also like childhood trauma, and 20% was he got too drunk and he's acting, so. And I like, people are like, but the problem is right here. And I'm not discounting that the behavior isn't a problem in the here and now. I'm saying, if you can get to the roots of it, you're doing yourself a service of understanding what you're repeating in your life. You could detach from their behavior just a little, do some work there, and it creates more space in the relationship. And it certainly pushes you to try to control them less and start to look at your own self a little more. And that's just one example. But
Mm-hmm.
couples are doing this all the time.
Yeah, yeah. So if you're listening right now, I think where to start, Jessica has given you a pathway to look at what the behaviors are that are troubling, and then ask yourself, what is familiar about this? What is familiar? And it could be little things. And I'm just a very inquisitive, curious person in my own relationship. Like, I don't really give myself a lot of grace and like a lot of passes and stuff. Like, when I'm acting crazy, I'm like, okay, what is going on with you? Like, what is really the problem here? And I find for me that's so helpful, because then it starts to not be all about my husband Sean and all of his stuff that he's doing or not doing. And it becomes like, why is this messing with you so much? And I love that. I just want couples to be able to do that more. And I think that doesn't mean the conflict's going to go away. The conflict's still going to be there, just like with your relationship. Like, I don't know if your ex-partner ever got out of that addiction, but I think it stopped being more about like, is he going to get out of this addiction, and more about like, what is this doing in me and what is it healing in me potentially?
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of people in the anxiously attached side, like me, we want to fix our partner. And I think what it did for me is like, I have to let go of that. I have more of my own healing to do. And sure, I would love for him to have been on that journey of, healing that within himself, but you could, and I'm a couples counselor, and I help so many couples, and you could heal in relationship. And I love imago therapy and EFT. If you're listening, those are great models for anyone who really wants good couples counseling with extra training. But you need two willing people, and both those people have to be very committed. So if you have someone that's not committed and you're listening, you could still do the work. And you
Yeah.
should still do the work, and you can use what they're doing and behaving to be a portal in to your own healing. And then either you can tolerate them differently, or you choose to leave. One of those two things happen.
So good. So good. Well, depending on when this podcast releases, Jessica's book might be in pre-order. So I want to encourage you all to get her book, whether it's in pre-order or whether it's available. And Jessica, give the people a place that they can find more about you. Where can they learn more about what you do, and about maybe some resources that you have?
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure that this podcast is going to come out before the book is immediately available, but I have free gifts for your audience specifically. One is a blueprint on attachment, and it explains the wheel of attachment right away, and it goes deeper into the levels. So anybody listening, you get that. And one is a video of me and my mentor. She's 82 and has studied science her whole life, and well, not her whole life, but we talk about the transition to inner security in such a profound way. And she's been such a big mentor towards me, and she's mentioned a lot in the book. So if you buy the book right now, you get your audience gets those two free things. So I really want to offer that so people can grab something immediately. And I'm on Instagram at Jessica Baum LMHC. I have a worldwide coaching business with like 6 other really talented therapists called the Conscious Relationship Group. And I have a private practice in Palm Beach, Florida called the Relationship Institute of Palm Beach. So any of those ways, and basically you can put Jessica Baum. I feel bad for anyone else that's named my name, but like I come up on Google if you just put my name in there.
So where can they go specifically to get the resources that you're sharing with the audience today? Is it jessicabaum.com?
No, you have the link.
Oh, I have the link, and I
You
will
should
post
put
it
it.
in the show notes.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Yes,
Yeah, I
yes,
really
yes.
want people to have those. When I did my first launch, I didn't do anything like that. And I really
Yeah.
want people to have something like today. So if you're listening, you can get that right now and just get started, and the book will be really close on its way.
All right, perfect. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for being with us today. You guys make sure to check out the show notes to this podcast, which you can find at danashay.com/podcast. I'll be sure to have the links to the resources that Jessica is giving you, and also, of course, the link to her book. And I just pray and wish that you do this work, that you start somewhere. We've given you a couple of on ramps where you can start this work today, but it really is to your betterment to begin the work of creating emotional connection, not just for you and your spouse's sakes, but really for your own sake, to begin this healing work so that you can be full and you can be wholehearted and you can be fully alive. So, again, Jessica, thanks so much for being with us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a great conversation.
Yes, you're absolutely welcome.